What's up everyone, welcome back to the shop. How do we become more effective woodworkers so that we kick butt on just about everything we make? I got a couple ideas. Exploring the world of dye stains. I'm not a big fan of staining wood. I just prefer the natural look of wood, but sometimes we gotta stain it for whatever reason. And if I do, then I'm gonna use a dye stain over a regular traditional stain. There's a lot of upsides into exploring dyes. If you've never dove into that world, they dry extremely fast, which means you can get back to working on your project a lot faster. You get really good deep penetration into the project, into the wood. From my experience, I usually get a really good even coverage across my work surface, regardless of the type of wood, which is not always the same whenever you're using a traditional stain. And what I really like about them is they're customizable. So usually when you're using dyes, you can kind of mix and match and play around with the colors and get the color that you want. And you're not forced to use whatever the label is on the can. So somebody might ask what brands to buy if they've never done dyes, then I would say General Finishes is really, really good. Transtent also is. No affiliation to these companies whatsoever. Just my experience, they make a really good product. Joining boards effectively. Anytime I'm gluing up a panel, multiple boards, I like to joint more than one board at a time. There's a couple reasons for this. One of them is that instead of running one board at a time across my joiner, I'm doing two boards, so it's just gonna be faster that way. But the main reason is it eliminates a little bit of error. So what I do is I take my boards, I lay them out so I know exactly how they're supposed to look, and I'll draw like a triangle or something across the faces of a couple of the boards. And then I take those and flip those up, run them across my joiner at the same time. Then whenever I lay them back out, make sure my triangle lines up, all the orientation's great, I know those edges are gonna match up perfectly. And that's because if my fence is just slightly off for some reason, I kick something, I bump something, anything can happen, and it's not exactly 100% dead on 90, it doesn't matter. I jointed both those at the same time, and those joints are gonna still line up perfectly. That's all that really matters. Acclimating your materials. Every shop has a certain humidity level, and you might have grabbed materials from someplace and you bring them into your shop, and the humidity at that source is not necessarily the same as in your shop. So you bring your wood in there, and if you're like me, you just want to start working right away. But the smart thing to do is let the wood acclimate so that the moisture content in the wood can level out. That's what's gonna really set you up for success instead of failure. I highly recommend picking up a moisture meter of some type and maybe having a couple sample boards of different species in your shop that you can measure against. Example is, let's say you went and you bought some maple boards and you brought them into your shop. Well, ideally, if you have a maple board that's been in your shop already, then you could check the moisture content of that sample, then go over to your new ones, check the moisture content of those, and see what the difference is. And when the new ones get down to where the old ones are, you're good. This is not just a one-time activity though. If you're milling thicker material, or even a 1-inch board, but you need to mill it really thin for whatever reason, if you're moving a lot of material from that wood, what you may find is that the moisture content directly inside that wood is just a little bit higher than the outside of it. Well, if you remove too much material too fast and jump into your project, then what you risk is that board cupping, twisting, bowing, cracking, all kinds of bad things that we don't want to even have happen. So another good rule of thumb is to mill in stages. Mill a little bit of your materials, let it sit overnight. 2 days would be great. Come back, finish milling it, build your project. That's ideal. Routing the ends of boards before the sides of boards. I'm always looking for efficiencies in the workshop, and one of the big time sucks is, well, sanding. One way to alleviate that is if I'm doing any sort of routing, like a profile around a board, I'm gonna route the ends before I route the sides. And what that's gonna do is it's going to help reduce any sort of tear out, which means less time sanding, fixing things, trying to do all the preparation to make it look good, because I routed it effectively the first time. All right, so picture this. You've got a board and you want to route a profile around it. So like a round over, an OG or something. So you take your board and you look at the end of it and you put the end grain on your router and you route the end grain first. So you route that round over, and when it exits that board, that's where you could have the tear out. Now, one way to get around that is a sacrificial board. So you put a board up against it so that your router bit exits your board, goes into the sacrificial board, and keeps going. That's a really good technique, but you can still have a little bit of tear out. What's helpful though is by doing the ends first and then turning the board to its side and then routing the side, when you do the sides, it's going to alleviate, it's going to remove that tear out. So it's like it didn't really happen. The opposite though is if you would have done the sides first, then turned around and did the ends, then you're gonna have tear out. And that sucks. Now you gotta fix it. Sanding efficiently. While we're on the subject of sanding, it's a major time suck. So how can we do it a little bit more efficiently so we can get on with our life? It helps if you come up with a standardized process for how you're gonna tackle the projects you typically make and also the finishes you generally use. Because if you like to apply a polyurethane, well, why would you sand your project to 10,000 grit when you're gonna put polyurethane on the top of it? So the smoothness of the wood doesn't really matter as much because you're coating it with polyurethane. There are a couple little tricks that we can do to set up a process. What I like to do is I like to have my sandpaper laid out with what I'm going to use. So if I'm using my random orbit sander, I will have 120, I'll have 180, and if I want to, I'll go up to 220, depends on the project and the finish that I'm using. I'll also keep a sanding eraser next to all my sandpaper so I can quickly pick it up, get all the gunk off my sandpaper, move on with my day. And now if I'm doing certain curves or I'm doing the inside of boxes or whatever, I'll have other tools already lined up, little contour tools that you can buy. Card scrapers are a big help. What's also really handy to have is some old magazines. People still read magazines? Or just a stack of like printer paper or something. People still use printers. You can take these and curl them up, put them in a particular shape, wrap them with sandpaper, and then you get inside all those weird areas that typically would be really hard to sand. If we can make sanding efficient, we are going to be really effective at getting through that phase and on to the next. Identifying your goals. I know that seems a little bit vague, but think of it this way. Is your goal to learn as many woodworking skills as you can? Build a whole bunch of stuff? Is your goal to make items that you can then sell, and that's really what your focus is going to be? It's up to you. There's no wrong answer. It's where's your goals going to be at? Because then you can focus all your priorities into that goal and really master the skills necessary to accomplish it. So here's an example. You want to sell things, right? You're gonna make stuff. You're gonna make cutting boards because cutting boards are awesome and people always want cutting boards. So you make cutting boards and you keep making them and you keep selling them and boom, 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 boom. You're going through a lot of cutting boards. Over the years, you have built in efficiencies. You've been able to make those cutting boards really fast at the same quality level that you've always wanted. It's amazing. But after 10 years of cutting boards, somebody asks you to make a table. Do you have the skills to make a table, the knowledge to make a table, some of the tools necessary to make a table? Maybe you do, and that would be amazing. Maybe you don't, and there's nothing wrong with that because you had the goal of making cutting boards and being awesome at that. Conversely, you have somebody else who likes to make different projects. I'll make a box, I'll make a table, I'll make a cutting board, kind of a jack of all trades, maybe a master of none. They may not be able to keep up with you on the cutting board thing. You may not be able to keep up with them on the box thing. And there's nothing that says we can't change our goals from time to time. It's always good at the end of the year to kind of reassess things, figure out, are we still on the path that we want to go on? And if not, we shift over, we focus our attention to that, and we go conquer it. Add one more thing. Admittedly, this takes a little bit of self-discipline, and that is whenever you build a project, before you could call it done, look at that project and say, what else? What else can I add to it? It doesn't mean that more is better. Sometimes less is more, but sometimes more is better as far as being a better woodworker. That makes sense in my head. Let me try to explain it. Let's say that you've got a box, pretty common project. Now think about it and go, maybe I can add splines to it. Maybe I can put this type of handle on it instead because I wasn't gonna do a handle. What is that one extra element you could add to that project? And ideally an element that maybe you didn't do in your last project. This is gonna have major ramifications in your woodworking journey. It's gonna improve your ability to be creative, but it's also going to teach you a heck of a lot of new skills and techniques. That's just one element for one project. Then you can look at the next project and say, maybe I wanna put that fancy handle on it. Or maybe I wanna use a certain species of wood I've never used. Maybe I want to try a new finish that I haven't used. If you do it on this project, the next one, the next one, you are building up this incredible skill set, compounded interest that goes into your woodworking bank, and all of that is going to make you a highly effective woodworker. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel. Maybe check out some of my other videos. You might dig them. Until we meet again, get in your shop and build something awesome.